Okay, good afternoon to everybody. We are really happy to have you in our Ukrainian pavilion at COP26. Oh, sorry, 27 already. Here we are at Decarbonization Day. And we will be speaking here about different aspects of this decarbonization. But first of all, I would like to say that this event, we have distinguished speakers. They are IPCC authors. And I'm really very pleased to say that we have this event here at COP. It was my dream to bring IPCC in Ukraine. Unfortunately, in Ukraine now is not very good situation. It is we are under invasion of Russian Federation, and it's not safe to go there and do any outreach event for IPCC. So I'm really very happy that we can do it here at COP in our Ukrainian pavilion. So today we will be speaking about science-based accelerating our green transition. And science-based is key word here. And I will be speaking on behalf of leading author of Working Group 1 of IPCC. And we have here Shirish, who is representative of Working Group 3, which is about mitigation, climate change. And we will be speaking on the topic of Working Group 2 as well. But I will give much more detail a bit later. Please, if it's possible to make my presentation. I will present myself because I need to do it actually. And yeah, so I'm Svetlana Krakovska, and I work in Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Institute. I'm leading author of Interactive Atlas and other chapters actually of Working Group 1 IPCC assessment report of 6th cycle, and I work for National Antarctic Scientific Center of Ukraine. So again, we will be speaking about this science-based green transition in Ukraine. This is first keyword, and another very important keyword that we will be speaking about Ukraine as model for post-conflict and post-disaster recovery, because on our view, this recovery, in this event, we will be not speaking about cause of the war, but after war, again, it is disaster, it is destruction. So we will be speaking about recovery, and it's, in some sense, it doesn't matter what destroy your house, was it tropical cyclone or missile. So in this context, please next slide. I will present briefly, again, myself, because I sometimes I'm a representative of Ukraine at IPCC meeting as well. And in last meeting, actually, I was speaking about accounting for emissions from the military in not only during the war, Russian war in Ukraine, but all military actually emissions, which is really essential if we are speaking about mitigation of climate change. So please next. Okay, so now we are going to what is IPCC. I believe that all of you knows, but just to make clear that IPCC is the highest level of science where we can assess all scientific literature about topic which related to climate change. And in this context, IPCC reports should be neutral with respect to policy, but they can can deal actually objectively with scientific, technical, and socioeconomic factors. That's what we will do here. Please next. Yeah, so here's very briefly history of IPCC, which is now more than 30 years from 1988. And this arrow shows a number of peer-reviewed literature devoted to climate change, actually. And we see the different assessment reports and the different achievements, actually, of IPCC. One of the most highest is Nobel Prize in 2007. And this year, IPCC, together with another intergovernmental panel, got prize for humanity, actually. So we are now finishing sixth cycle. Please, next slide. And this sixth cycle of IPCC, actually, oh, sorry. Okay, just to say briefly that IPCC actually consists of different working groups. So I was talking as working group 1, so I work on a physical science basis. There is another working group 2 and working group 3, which is about mitigation of climate change, and decarbonization. It's about mitigation mostly, of course. And we have this task force in IPCC of national greenhouse gas inventories. So next, please. Yeah, and here it's about sixth cycle. So actually this sixth cycle is the most ambitious one for IPCC, because during this cycle, IPCC already prepared special reports which devoted to global warming on 1.5, ocean cryosphere, and land, and 3 assessment report for 3 working group. And we will have this synthesis report very soon in March 2023. Next, please. Well, just to give you some some idea, it's about working group 1, but the same is for working group 2 and 3. So how many authors from how many countries? Well, it's gender, not maybe balanced yet, but not bad, actually, proportion, I would say. And we have very almost 2/3 of first-time IPCC author. And how many literature actually we assess, and how many review comments we've got here. So next, please. So I will say just very briefly a few main messages, just in the context of climate change and the main messages. So we know that, and we already heard it from last year many times, that this is change is unprecedented, intensifying, and widespread and rapid. Next, please. So we know that we have concentration of carbon dioxide highest in at least 2 million years. So it's desperate in some kind, and all other actually demonstration of climate change. So it's unprecedented in thousands of years. Next, please. And this actually another message that it's indisputable. So it's indisputable. Sorry, it's that this human activity is causing climate change and making these extreme climate events even worse. In this context, this human activities, so that's why I want to speak here in Decarbonization Day, because that's where we can do something. Next, please. Okay, so if we're speaking about extreme events from this working group 1 IPCC report, it's clear it's different scenarios for different warming levels. When we have pre-industrial one time per 10 years or one time per 50 years. So at current level of warming, we have it 5 times more. It means that all these warm extremes, hot temperature, which were recently in once, in 50 years, now it's once in 10 years, one in a decade now. And the intensity actually is increasing as well. Next, please. Because not only temperature, of course, we are speaking about warming levels, but it intensifies our cycle of water actually. And then we have this heavy precipitation, and we have agricultural and ecological droughts. And with this, we have this indeed very high intensification. When we have again this heavy precipitation with proceedings more frequently and more intense, in fact. So now with 1 degree warming, we have 7% higher intensity of heavy precipitation, for example. And here we have a much more frequent droughts. And this is really essential for Ukraine. Next, please. Okay, here I want just to present briefly from Working Group 2 perspective from Professor Daniela Schmidt, who actually was coordinating lead author of the chapter for Europe, where we will be speaking mostly because we are speaking from European perspective for Ukraine. Next, please. Yeah, she spoke about, so this Working Group 2, we are, it's mostly about impact on natural and human system. Next. So this is a basic concept, actually. When we have a risk which consists of exposure, hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and we add response. So especially in human system, we can do it in natural system as well, but actually that's what we want to do here and to emphasize today, at least, and this decarbonization day. And here it's about this risk, how it can cascade or compound indirectly or in different ways. So this risk can exacerbate or can compensate. So it depends on special this event or hazard, let's say. And here it's just loop. How it could be in Europe particularly. So this extreme heat in Central Europe, where we are, Ukraine actually, and it exacerbates wildfires actually with strong wind together. So we will come to it later. So please next. Again, so this different aspects of this risk. So we can speak about sectoral risk, which again, so on different sectors, and these sectors, they interact as well, and this risk can again be much higher or less higher, and temporarily it could be again, so these emissions which were 100 years ago, now we have emissions cause concentration higher, and then this concentration frequency of extreme events. So we are speaking now, and spatially. So it is not only about where you emit. It could be this impact in different places. So it's emit in North America, but it will have consequences in other places of the world. So next, please. Yeah, and here it's for Europe, actually, not for Europe, but it's part of Europe just highlighted here. And this is from Atlas, from Working Group 1, Interactive Atlas, where I'm leading also. So I really like this way of presenting these stripes. You see, I have the same, let's say. So it's stripes when we don't want to be here in this scenario, in fact. But this scenario is just present here, so you can see how it's result, this global warming results, particularly in this region, let's say. And it's clear from this picture that it's much more in, so this temperature change much more high, for example, in polar regions than in tropical. Next, please. Yes, this is about some solution. So it's about nature-based solution, which actually one of them, and we will hear today more on this. But just to say, as forests needs these projections for 100 years, why we do these models actually for a so long period? Just because we know about the solution, and we need to know where to grow which kind of forest. Next, please. Okay, so it's about cities. And cities is really crucial, and we will hear today more. We have speakers devoted to cities, but just to say that, of course, with these global models, we cannot judge about cities. So we need much better models to have better resolution to see what is going on in cities and how cities will interact with climate change, let's say. Next, please. Yes, and here it's again these stripes, and these stripes for different countries. And I just highlight Ukraine here, and you see that Ukraine actually in the second tenth of all countries. So it means that in Ukraine we have this climate change, this warming, you know, much higher than, let's say, in tropical region. So it means that this change is higher, and we need to adapt to this climate change as well. And some part actually of adaptation can serve to mitigation and to decarbonization. That's why I put it here again. Next, please. And here is Ukraine, actually. So it's our new results for this project, European project, Cortex project, the most actually detailed one with 10-kilometer resolution. So we put it for Ukraine for different scenarios here. And you see difference. You see difference to the middle of the century and to the end of the century. Of course, we don't want this one because it will be no place for Ukraine to live. I even don't speak about our current situation, but we speak here only about climate change. And about precipitation, so it's clear that for its summer precipitation, it's in July. And you see this big difference actually in Ukraine. So Ukraine, again, on the border with different projections. So we have more projected precipitation in our west part where we have mountains, Carpathian Mountains. It means more flooding actually. And in this area, which is hot now in Ukraine, we project a much drier situation actually. And this is, if be honest, I commented on this many times when at the beginning of the war, people ask, so you see Crimea, it is already without water. And now we have the most fighting here. Of course, it's for the territory, but for the water as well. So water is crucial for our region as for many other regions on the earth. That's why we are speaking about this post-conflict, post-disaster as well. So droughts is a big disaster in many places on the earth as well. So please, next. Again, it's more essential for this part as Eastern and Northern Europe about snow cover and seasonal snow, but many, again, about water. So many our rivers, they fed by snow, actually. They snow-fed rivers. But now we have much less snow, seasonal snow, and we have less water in our rivers. So, and here you can see, actually, that notwithstanding, we have less duration of snow cover, but we have increasing of maximum snow height. So it means that we have sometimes very high snowfall. And I remember in 2013 in Ukraine, we had on 23rd of March, we had very big event with snowfall when our Kyiv capital was just blocked with snow for a week, actually. And it's expected to be more in future, notwithstanding we will have less seasonal snow as well. Next, please. Again, so it's about snow, but from other perspective, let's say, and this is for it's projections. So before it was actually a real situation, but now it's projections. And you see that here is a transition zone actually between where we have less snow and more snow. We don't care too much about this territory, let's say, but some of our rivers goes from that territory. So we need to think about whole story, let's say, picture of the story. Next, please. Yeah, and here I just showed you that we expect changes in Ukraine. And here it's about project I involved in. It's a PANA 3 project, actually. And yesterday we had big and extensive presentation, scientific presentation about how we do this. And actually this project started before the full-scale war in Ukraine. And we're supposed to do 3 pilot oblasts to do this strategy for adaptation to climate change in 3 oblasts, which is Ivano-Frankivsk, Lvivsk, and Mykolaiv Oblast in Ukraine. And we decide now to continue because now we need even more actually to adapt in this region as well, because they change situation in different ways. I just ask you to maybe to see our recording from yesterday's session. Actually, it was yesterday's session. Next, please. Yeah, it's this again about this project which implemented by Europlan, EGIS, and it's with the support of European Union. And we're really happy to have this support, of course, because yeah, otherwise we will be not able to do a lot of stuff for our country. Next, please. So this is different components, and I was speaking about this components 3, but even more now essential to speak about this regional waste management. And again, it goes to the topic of the day about decarbonization, because this waste actually produce a lot of emission as well. So we need to deal in different way, because we have different kind of waste now. We have military waste, and we need to do it more clever, more smart in this changing world of climate as well. So next, please. Okay, so with this, it's again message from Working Group 1, which connect to Working Group 3, in fact, because it says about these emissions and mitigation. So it's about CO2, methane, and other greenhouse gases. So it's clear message that we need to reduce them. And it's not reduce, and this is positive message, in fact. So we don't need only, you know, strict ourselves to some other way. Like in Ukraine now, we have electricity cut. Yeah, we, you know, we are forced to reduce ourselves to consume less electricity just because 40% of our energy infrastructure just destroyed. But it's about positive consequences. I mean, it's about improving air quality. So if we will emit less, we will have better air quality and better health. So it's not only, you know, we need to emphasize these good consequences as well. So next, please. Yeah, and here we speak about different scenarios. And with these different scenarios, which goes from Working Group 1 again, so we can see a different result actually of this temperature change. So this is cumulative CO2 emissions since pre-industrial, which was, you know, it's different ways actually, and it's respond to different economical situation in the world, in fact. So it's a growth after the war, after the Second World War, we had growth in middle, well, it's another, it's on next, but you will see it. But actually, you will see that we emit less when we have economical crisis, or, for example, COVID situation, we had 7% less emitted in 1 year. But actually, it didn't respond. So like global temperature didn't respond because climate system is too much inertial. But anyway, you can see these different consequences of this very low and high CO2 emissions, and these consequences in temperature is huge. And now I'll go to the next slide, and here it's time frame for this. So it's again the same scenarios, the same exit of this cumulative, and here you see this time frame. So when we need to actually to reduce our emission, to decarbonize our economy, and then we will have less warm world, let's say. Next, or yeah. So this is the main message. It was main message that our decision actually shapes the future. And today, I hope we will know better how what kind of decision we need actually in different sectors in order to, you know, to ensure for us this better future. And with this, I guess I will stop my presentation, and we will come to another presentation, which will give Natalia Pustilnik. Natalia, are you ready?
Yes, hello, shall I share my screen? Yes?
Yes, sure. You can share your screen.
Okay, I cannot because the host has disabled screen sharing.
Yeah, just one moment.
Okay.
Now, try.
Yes, perfect. Okay, can you see it?
Okay, so floor is yours.
Okay, one moment. Yes, is everything working? Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the discussion about post-war recovery in Ukraine, for which we all hope. And just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Natalia Pustilnik. I'm a project officer at WWF Ukraine, working on nature-based solutions and their implementation into Ukraine's reform agenda. And my focus is specifically on NBS in agriculture. So when we started the project in summer 2021, of course, we couldn't have imagined the war and the challenges we'll have to face. And of course, we have to mention the consequences of war for people and nature. And of course, it is a tremendous human suffering. It is loss of human lives and destruction of infrastructure, but it is also contamination of rivers and our soils, and the destruction of forests and shelter belts and so on. So this infrastructure that was destroyed was built using energy from fossil fuels, and the nature that was destroyed existed for centuries and provided us with clean water, with food, and with protection from extreme weather events. So now we have to think about how to restore both nature and economy and infrastructure, but not at the cost of each other, of mainly at the cost of nature. So can we find such win-win solutions? And as was recognized by a joint IPCC and IPBES report in 2021, nature-based solutions can be such a win-win strategy, at least partially to address our goals, because they were recognized as a way to both help us adopt and mitigate climate change, and at the same time to preserve biodiversity and human livelihoods, and to promote resilience. So I'm sure people are aware, but just in case if somebody is not, nature-based solutions is an umbrella term that unites a range of actions aimed at protecting, sustainably managing, and restoring ecosystems that have benefits for both people and nature. And in March 2022, the definition was agreed. This is a multilateral definition of NBS by UNEA, and their role in global response to climate change was also recognized. So the topic of NBS also has been actively discussed at COP27, and hopefully there will be more financial promises to accelerate action on NBS this year. So what are the most promising nature-based solutions that we see that can be used for both green post-war recovery and for climate change adaptation? And I'll quickly mention 3 sectors: water, forest, and agriculture, because that's what we focused on. But of course, all these nature-based solutions are interrelated as the sectors are interrelated. So as Svetlana mentioned, Ukraine has low sufficiency in water resources, and climate predictions are not very bright. So we have 2 problems: lacking of water in some places, like depletion of underground water sources and contact of rivers, and etc. And we have excess of water in other places, like north and west, where we have excessive flooding and heavy rains and extreme precipitation events. And of course, the war has contributed to the crisis, because it contributed to the pollution of water ecosystem and the destruction of hydro infrastructure. So what are some of the nature-based solutions that can be help us for sustainable recovery? We can just briefly discuss them. For example, with the division with the main benefits for adaptation and for adaptation and mitigation. Of course, the division is not strict. So for example, such nature-based solutions must be applied for successful post-war recovery as restoration and regulation of springs and headwaters, floodplain management and restoration and protection of riparian buffer zones, and river restoration. So all of these nature-based solutions already exist in Ukraine, but they need to be scaled up, or the regulation needs to be improved on their implementation. And the other nature-based solutions which has benefits for both adaptation and mitigation, as I'm sure you know, is the importance of peatlands. We know that since the 40s, more than 1 million hectares of peatlands was drained in Ukraine for agricultural purposes, and now they are massive greenhouse gas emitters. But we can actually, restoring them will have positive aspects on multiple levels, both for mitigation and for adaptation, for example, for flood protection. And also it is very important because peatlands are mostly concentrated in northern and western Ukraine, and northern Ukraine suffered very much from the Russian aggression in the first days. So restoration of peatlands could be an economic opportunity. In some places, it could be combined with paludiculture, which is sustainable use of peatlands, and it can have benefits for local communities. And the next one is forests. So forests cover about 60% of Ukrainian territory, but about half of them are artificially created and with very few tree varieties. They capture about 10% of greenhouse gases. But they also suffer from climate change. As Svetlana mentioned, the forests that are grown now will mature, or that are planted now will mature in a totally different conditions. And in Ukraine, it's expansion of non-forest biomes from south to north. It's reduction of boreal forests and associated biodiversity. So all of these changes we need to consider when designing the restoration projects. And good news, of course, is that Ukraine recognizes increasing forest cover and sustainable management as one of the main measures for mitigation of climate change. Yeah, and one other aspect is, of course, that the war affected about 30% of Ukrainian forests, which is 3 million hectares. So it is a huge number. And so what are some of the nature-based solutions that can help us to restore our forest resources after the war with the climate adaptation in mind? So there are three main: protection, management, and restoration. So we need to protect those specifically valuable forests, such as floodplain and wetland forests, which can sequester up to twice as much as CO2 as terrestrial forests. So they're extremely important. Then primeval and old growth forests, which can be used, which are extremely important for research of how forests can adapt to climate change, because these forests survived for hundreds of years. And the self-seeding forest, it's forests on abandoned agricultural land, which developed by themselves, and they captured some of the CO2 over the years, and they need to be protected. So their status needs to be changed from agricultural land to actual forests, which is going on. And the second solution is management, sustainable management of forest resources. And we suggest nature-based solutions such as close to nature forestry, which has a specific methodology, and it involves different aged and mixed species of trees and selective cuts. So if you manage forest in that way, we can achieve net zero loss of forest cover, because these forests will be more resilient to fires and because of the different age structure, etc. And restoration is forest, last but not least, it's forest landscape restoration. That is necessary both for Ukraine's goal, which was before the war, to increase its forest cover to 18%, which could be increased also, but also for regions where forests were destroyed because of the war. So the approach we should take is to consider the forest landscape restoration approach, which means, again, looking at the whole approach is to look at, to develop resilient forests in the future to climate change. And the last sector is agriculture, which is specifically also what I do, agricultural MBS. And agriculture is, of course, a very important topic here at COP. Food system transformations in agriculture have been very important in this COP and the previous, but it is, of course, one of the difficult sectors, and in Ukraine as well. Some of the facts is that Ukraine's territory is 70% agricultural land, and it contributes to a lot of to a significant proportion of GDP growth of the country, but at the cost of nature. So we see very high levels of soil erosion. Because of the different estimates, it's from 4 to 10 million hectares. Really difficult to estimate. Different scientists provide different numbers. Then there is loss of soil organic carbon, and agriculture is responsible for 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, it is impacted by climate change. So it is the three main impacts is that I estimated that are already happening and that will increase in the future is reduced soil moisture availability, heat waves and droughts, and pests and diseases and their spread. And the war, of course, affected the agriculture sectors, as we've heard a lot, not only infrastructure and seaports and grain storage facilities and just direct destruction of fields and equipment, but also about 50,000 hectares are polluted with mines, with toxic materials and unexploded ordnance, and about 3 million hectares are lost due to occupation mainly, or are not planted or damaged. And agriculture, as I mentioned, is a difficult topic because although in the last years in Ukrainian policy, agriculture adaptation to climate change has been highlighted, and there are some promising developments, but it's still not enough to meet Ukraine's ambitions and to meet the global goals in general. And also there is a lack of understanding of its role for potential for other SDGs, such as biodiversity conservation and increase. But what are some of the promising nature-based solutions for sustainable restoration of agriculture? And I would say not only restoration, but transformation, really, because agriculture sector as it was not very sustainable. So we need to transform it. And some of the 4 solutions that we suggest that have benefits for both adaptation and mitigation are carbon farming, specifically on eroded soils, which, as I said, are up to 10 million hectares. And it can help to sequester up to 6.6 million tons of carbon. And of course, have additional important benefits of improved soil and increased yields. And for that, we can discuss what measures we can take, but we need some national mechanism for supporting of carbon farming, for monitoring and measuring carbon on farms, etc. And the second measure is conservation agriculture and agroecology. It is mentioned in different documents, but it is not very much scaled up in Ukraine, but it can help us sequester, as you can see, up to 7.5 million tons of CO2 if applied on at least 30% of Ukrainian arable lands. So for that, we need financial support, redirection of agricultural subsidies to support it, some tax incentives for companies that apply these measures, and some maybe insurance mechanisms for high-risk businesses that would disincentivize them to use harmful practices. And the third solution is not very popular among agricultural producers, but very much discussed in Ukraine since a long time. It's the return of nature elements to agricultural landscape and post-war restoration through rewilding. Of course, this is a difficult question because these are all agricultural lands. But we know from statistics of the state geocadastre that we have up to 500,000 hectares of degraded lands. So this land is like, which can no longer be used for production. It has to be recultivated and restored and conserved for some time. At the same time, we have those 50,000 hectares of already contaminated land with mines. So after it is demined, we need to do something with this land. And the potential solution that has benefits for mitigation is rewilding them, so restoring the natural cover there, which could be grasslands, could be wetlands, could be forests, and it can help us sequester up to 1 million tons of CO2. And on the other hand, it has huge benefits for biodiversity. And for example, the southern territories, which also suffered during the war very much, There, the natural cover is grasslands, and grasslands are very adapted to future climate predictions because grasslands is natural cover there in the arid, in the steppe zone of Ukraine, and they can be not only help us mitigate climate change, but adapt to it and have benefits for local communities, for restoration of traditional varieties of livestock, etc. So, and in addition, it can be an opportunity for financial donors to invest not only in like carbon offsets just to mitigate climate change, but if they want to be more thinking about biodiversity, this can be also an opportunity for biodiversity offsets in a good sense of it. So it means restoring, helping to sequester carbon, restoring Ukraine's biodiversity, and helping people to have sustainable livelihoods. And last but not least is agroforestry, which is in Ukraine, which includes, it's a united term, but in Ukraine it has a long history by the system of shelter belts, protective forest shelter belts for the fields. And according to estimates, if we increase the shelter belts up to 8,000 hectares from current 300,000, it can help us sequester additional CO2, as you can see on the screen, and also have benefits for adaptation, because shelter belts have huge benefits for agricultural producers, for farmers, because they protect from wind, from extreme weather events, they preserve moisture, and generally increase harvest also. And I think I don't know how much time I have, I think maybe not much. So these were some of the nature-based solutions that we believe are extremely important for post-war restoration of agriculture, forest, and forest sector. And we have developed some general policy recommendations for scaling up these solutions. What needs to be done? It's 10 items or 10 positions. I think maybe I will not mention them now, and you can read them at our first Ukrainian language nature-based solutions platform, where we have information about different nature-based solutions, how they can be implemented, case studies, and this general policy recommendations. And this platform is designed to bring together a diverse set of stakeholders and policymakers to enhance the dialogue on how to use NBS for post-war recovery on different levels of governance. And just to conclude, I'd like to conclude that war, of course, like any other crisis, is a tragedy. But it is also an opportunity for transformation for our low carbon and nature positive future. And we saw how nature became our ally in defending our land against the invaders, and it can also become our ally in restoring it. So we must recognize the role of the social, ecological, and economic importance of our forests, soils, and waters, and wildlife, and it must be an absolute foundation for recovery. So a resilient economy is based on a stable climate and thriving nature, and it can only be in that way. And I wish for that future. I hope it will come. And thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Natalia. Yeah, this applause to you. Thank you. It's a very detailed and very good solution that actually you presented. And I just can mention that actually I printed here few examples, summary for decision makers about this project, about nature-based solution for Ukraine in these different sectors. So you can have a look, or you go to this platform which Natalia already presented. And with this, we will go to Mykola Shlapak, who is actually another leading author from Ukraine for Working Group 3, and he worked with nature, with national politics, as far as I know. But I guess, Mykola, the floor is yours. You will explain better.
Yeah, thank you, Svetlana. Could you please launch the PowerPoint for me? Well, while it's starting, I will start. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was one of the lead authors for Chapter 13 on national and subnational policies for Working Group 3 on mitigation. and I will talk about some of the findings of the sixth assessment report that are most relevant, in my opinion, for post-war recovery in Ukraine. Actually, the Working Group 3 report was published on 4th of April this year, and that was the 40th day of Russian invasion of Ukraine, when the world learned about barbaric war crimes committed in Ukrainian cities and villages. And today, Ukraine continues its fight against the aggressor and pays a huge price with thousands killed, destroyed cities, massive destruction of energy infrastructure, water supply facilities, and contamination of agricultural land and natural ecosystems. IPCC report mentions that at the global level, military spendings back in 2012, where the year for which the latest data were available, amounted to $1.75 trillion, which is like 13 times higher than the global level of official development assistance. The authors suggested that if at least part of this sum moved to the financing of SDG agenda, that could have a significant impact on achieving the climate and global sustainable development goals. But unfortunately, the world is currently moving in the opposite direction of confrontation and increased military spendings. Next, please. Yeah. As was mentioned today already, Russia's war in Ukraine have devastating impact for people, infrastructure, and environment. In terms of climate change impact, this war resulted in dozens of million tons of greenhouse gases emissions, and much more would be generated during reconstruction activities. The most significant sources of climate impact are associated with the rebuilding of civilian infrastructure, fires in natural ecosystem and farmlands, and fuel combustion during the warfare. Just 2 days ago at COP27, the interim assessment of greenhouse gases emissions caused by Russia's war in Ukraine were presented, and I encourage you to check the report and read it. Also, as it was mentioned, the war has significant impact on agricultural land and also natural protected areas. According to some estimates, approximately 20% of protected areas in Ukraine were affected by military operations. Also, the war impacted the provision of decent living standards for millions of people, not only in Ukraine, but in other countries, in particular due to the blocking of seaports in Ukraine. Millions of people were affected in Africa and other regions due to the food security risks. Yes, and also if you are talking about recovery, post-war recovery and rebuilding, the first topic I would comment on is the rebuilding with future needs in mind. IPCC 6 assessment report for the first time features a chapter on demand, services, and social aspects of climate mitigation. In particular, the report highlights that rapid and deep changes in demand make it easier for every sector to reduce greenhouse gases emissions in the short and medium term. So, because demand side measures are important, because every unit of improvement at the demand side results in significant savings at the factor of 6 to 7 units at the supply side for the supply of primary resources used in the manufacturing of products and services. Most significant greenhouse gases emissions reductions could be achieved in buildings sector, food demand, land transport, and also industry. Just behavior changes and cultural changes alone could trigger up to 3 gigatons of CO2 savings in 2050. And it's important that providing services with less energy and resource input is consistent with providing well-being for all, because positive impacts on well-being significantly outweighs their negative impacts. In such sector like active mobility, efficient buildings, and prosumer choices in renewable technologies, there are like numerous benefits for people and well-being, and there were no like negative side effects detected during the assessment. Having said that, it's like important to highlight that rebuilding and recovery strategy for Ukraine should take into account demand-side measures in climate mitigation and focus on ensuring decent living standards via provision of essential services in a low-carbon way. Such essential services include shelter and living conditions, energy services, and mobility. This approach would avoid high-cost solutions and also avoid more stringent climate policies in the future. Also, with respect to demand-side solutions, they require both motivation and capacity for change. And as mentioned in the IPCC report, in general, the motivation of households worldwide to change their energy behavior is quite low. However, the war impacts give a significant push for change. People change their perception on what is like really important in their life, and the willingness to act increases. That's why it's very important that the post-war recovery provide capacity for them to like employ demand-side solutions. This includes like relevant infrastructure, markets, and access to relevant goods and services for people to be able to choose knowledge and expertise, and also like policy and regulatory framework. Next, please. The second big block is, and the second priority is rebuilding with green solutions. The war has the most significant impact with respect to civil infrastructure on public and residential buildings, energy systems, and also water supply systems. Because there were many examples where such facilities were deliberately targeted. Besides, also with respect to energy, significant number of renewable energy power plants are still under occupation at the moment on the south of Ukraine. Therefore, it's like important to consider the key findings from IPCC report for these sectors. In particular, for building sector, IPCC highlight the importance of sufficiency, efficiency, and renewable framework, which reduce the cost of constructing and operation of buildings without like negative impact on comfort of the people. So if like renewable and efficiency part is more common, sufficiency interventions in buildings include the optimization of the use of the buildings, repurposing of existing unused buildings, also prioritizing multifamily buildings instead of single-family buildings, and adjusting the size of the buildings. Among the energy efficiency measures, the like promising technologies to be used during construction and retrofitting of buildings include energy savings, such as heat pumps, smart ventilation, heat recovery systems, but also important to use construction materials with low embodied carbon, because at this stage also significantly impacts on the climate is experienced. And also renewable energy technologies that could reduce emissions in buildings such as biomass energy, solar thermal energy, and PV system and heat pumps. For energy sector, IPCC report concludes that warming cannot be limited well below 2 degrees Celsius without rapid and deep reduction changes in energy systems. Such substantial changes would be required over the next 30 years and include significant reduction in fossil fuel consumption, increased production from low and zero carbon energy sources, but also increased use of electricity and alternative energy carriers. A large share of renewable energy power could be integrated in the grids through batteries and other storage technologies, enhanced transmission infrastructure, flexible non-renewable generation, and advanced controls and greater demand-side responses. With respect to restoration of Ukraine's energy systems, it should also rely on renewable energy sources, including distributed small-scale renewable power generation, but also foresee greater energy system integration across regions, including internationally and across components of the energy systems. Such as rapid shift towards renewables could change investment patterns and create economic opportunities for growth, since Ukraine has sufficient renewable energy resources to offer for investment projects. And also IPCC reports conclude that agriculture offers significant mitigation opportunities while delivering food, if it will be able to adapt to future climate. Natalia mentioned a lot of technologies and nature-based solutions that could be applied in Ukraine. And indeed, land-based mitigation can both deliver carbon dioxide removal and enable emission reductions in other sectors by providing renewable energy resources and substituting fossil fuels. Agriculture, including nature-based solutions, could provide very significant emission reductions at relatively low cost. So that is also very important. And Ukrainian soil provides significant opportunities to sequester carbon and reduce emissions using conservative tillage technologies, cover crops, agroforestry, and other biochar and other technologies and practices also mentioned by Natalia. So I think that focusing on carbon farming opportunities during post-war recovery could not only contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation, but also create benefits for operational efficiency of agricultural producers and support economic recovery. So in general, transformative changes are possible, and post-war recovery indeed could be used as an opportunity for such rapid and deep transition in various sectors, included in those that were most affected by the war. Next, please. And the third topic is climate finance. With respect to climate finance, there are several important takeaways from the IPCC 6 assessment report that I would like to highlight. First, finance to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance resilience to climate impacts represents a critical enabling factor for the low carbon transition. And there is a significant climate financing gap. And to close this global mitigation investments should be increased by a factor of 3 to 6. So significantly increase is needed. This is especially important for countries with already significant stresses on public finances. Second, there is a mismatch between the capital availability in the developed world and the future emissions expected in other countries. This emphasizes the need to recognize the explicit and positive social value of global cross-border mitigation financing and the importance of a significant push for international climate finance. And third, international climate finance can flow through different bilateral, multilateral, and other channels involving a range of different types of institutions, both public and private, with different mandates and focuses. The multiplication of sources and channels of international climate finance can help address growing climate-related needs. And using these findings to our topic, it's important to highlight that war results in tremendous pressure on public budget because it reduces the revenues collected and increasing the spendings. This results in massive redirection of financial flows and undermines the ability of the country to finance climate mitigation and adaptation actions. As a result, there will be a huge demand to access to international climate finance during post-war recovery. And this multiplication of sources and channels of finance is especially important for Ukraine because it has no access to key financial instruments available now, such as Green Climate Fund. Financial support for post-war recovery should become a source of climate finance by integrating mitigation and adaptation aspects to the projects and programs that will be supported. And also new market instruments of Paris agreements should also be considered as a source of climate finance. And next, please, the last one, the last topic is policy and institutions. IPCC report mentions that incorporation of climate mitigation actions in broader development contexts can increase the speed, depth, and coverage of emission reductions and achieve the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. Climate governance support emission reductions and investment in low carbon technologies and infrastructure, and both market policy instruments and regulatory instruments have already demonstrated their effectiveness in different countries and sectors. Long-term deep emission reductions are best achieved through both mitigation policies encouraging the development of low carbon technologies, but also policies which are weakening high carbon technologies, such as removal of fossil fuel subsidies. And also climate governance could be directly aimed at emission reductions and mitigation, but also can focus on other priorities such as energy security or air pollution reduction, but has in parallel can have an impact on greenhouse gases emissions and support adaptation efforts. And also important finding is that policy packages are better able to support mitigation activities rather than individual policies. Integration of climate mitigation policies in economic stimulus packages and recovery policies in general have the potential to meet both short-term economic goals, but also enabling longer-term sustainability goals. So developing policy packages incorporating carbon price and regulatory requirements, other policy measures could create conditions for green economic recovery of Ukraine after the war. And also important that strengthening of institutional capacity is important, since institutions can enable governance by coordinating actions across actors, scales, and different sectors. And finally, next, please. Just to conclude that post-war recovery in Ukraine with integration of climate change response may involve transformational changes in infrastructure and society, which would benefit both the climate and people of Ukraine and our economy. So thank you, and stand with Ukraine in our fight for justice.
Thank you, Mykola. Actually, you made very, comprehensive actually and complex overview of all different aspects of this recovery. And with this, I want to actually to invite Alexey Ryabshin, who will speak on the opportunities and requirements, I guess, for our business. So please, Alexey is with us. I can give you actually another mic, I guess. You can.
Thank you, dear colleague. Yeah, I will be standing here for me to be visible. You need to turn it off. Okay. So yeah, I'm better. Apologies for this. Yeah, my name is Alex Ryabshin. I'm the member of Ukrainian delegation since 2015, representing my countries at COP. And I'm also advisor to the Ukrainian government to green and clean issues. And also one of my role is the advisor to the biggest oil and gas company which is willing to decarbonize. It's Ukrainian Naftogaz. And I guess I will be talking about my experience, how to make oil and gas company more greener and cleaner. I'm not speaking about the greenwashing. I'm speaking about the fundamental transformation of the company that is willing to do this. So there are three ways which motivate companies to become greener. First is the requirement from the state. So if the state demands more strict regulation, the company will go for it. Second is voluntary. If the company's management believe in climate change, in this, if the company is willing to somehow have a better images for the investor relationship, the company will do the transformation. And third, and this is most probable case everywhere, is profit, because green transformation will create a profit for a company and company will be working that way. So in the case of Naftogaz, we have two green pathways. First is new businesses, new green businesses. So a traditional oil and gas company is now switching from the oil and gas to multi-energy company. So the same is like the same pathway Naftogaz tried to pursue. So to become the biggest producer of hydrogen in Ukraine, of biomethane in Ukraine, to enable the market of a biomethane and hydrogen for Ukraine. Also to produce the heat, not from the fossil fuel, not from gas, but from wooden chips or pellet. And this is in what like the company invests in right now. Before the war, we were about to have our first hydrogen project, not commissioned, but financed. So we already had the off-taker agreement. We already had a supplier for the equipment. Unfortunately, the war shifted the hydrogen topic, which is very important, to more like post-war green recovery, but it's really important and the company will go for it. Also, a super important and interesting topic is carbon capture storage, because we in Ukraine has a huge amount of opportunity to store the carbon. And like last year, we had a first ever in a company request for carbon capture storage, and we had a lot of internal consultation that this might be a super cool business. And the second issue for the companies are the internal efficiency and more green production of the fossil fuel. So I'm speaking about methane, I'm speaking about fugitive emission, etc. So we supported the Global Methane Pledge and investing a lot in fighting with the methane and having more energy efficient equipment. This is kind of the pathway that the company is going on, but the key, like, and why I decided to hold this intervention, especially for the scientific panel, is the data, because you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So I question, like, I came to the company and the first things I said, like, where's your baseline? There is no baseline. So there is a routine process of data collection, and this data is collected. We have huge amount of branches all over the country, and they are collected under the different methodology. And last year, like the company invested in some of demethanization program, and like we suppose that we will receive a decrease in CO2 and in methane, but it rose up, and we're like, why? Because the different methodology, which is not coincide with each other. So the accuracy of data, for example, for us, now it's a problem. So you can invest in any kind of a green business or the decarbonization issue, but if you don't have the kind of the inventory more or less precise, like you cannot kind of utilize this data. Also, a lot of the requests coming from, I don't know, World Bank, EBRD, like whatever, they requested a lot of policies, sustainability policies, climate policies, which the company didn't have. So it was in progress to do. So all this bureaucracy, all this data collection is super important, but it costs. And we are able to work with international donors in order to have this process operated, but it will take a bit of time. So like, I bet like the company put a target like carbon neutrality till 2040, and that's it. So it took me, for example, like half of a year to understand what does it mean, because it was a decision made by the board, and it was just a decision without any action plan, without any kind of measurement how you can calculate it. So to keep the story short, so the data is super really important. The science, like we believe in the scientific data, but like how you will manage and how you will measure and how you will achieve this. So how you will put the company on a track on the climate neutrality, how you will establish this best ESG practices when the state is not requiring to this. And one more. So we are reporting for all the CO2 equivalent on 2 tracks. First, like MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification. Our government is trying to establish a carbon trading mechanism, and we're reporting as a tax purpose. So, and these 2 methodologies are itself already has like 7% of differences. So we collect CO2 data improperly, then we report one methodology, and second methodology which has also some kind of a non-accuracy. So it needs to be updated, it needs to be calculated. So the data is a key for the future decarbonization of not only Naftogaz, but all of the companies in Ukraine, in order, as Mykola and many others said, like if we would like to have the green recovery, we need to be accountable how like this money, this investment will affect the CO2 reduction. And if we are not able to calculate it precisely for our international donors, it will be problematic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexey. Actually, yeah, it was really interesting and scientifically, yeah, demanded, I would say. So, yeah, so thank you for this actually, and yeah, thank you that you find the time to come since you are busy with other business. But now I will go for other scientists, actually very prominent scientists from Turkey, here, Kilkish, who will present us some other solution for urban planning, I hope, and we will know how it's better to recover in Ukraine, in the city, our environment, let's say. I will give you a mic, I guess, Shir. So we are really happy. You should, yeah, you should see see here, and then our. Because we have actually online translation, so I hope it will be really very well received, because yeah, it's a really very great pleasure to have this author in our panel, and for our not only for Ukrainian, because I believe it's international actually. Yeah, so thank you. Floor is yours.
And thank you very much, Svetlana, for this panel on Decarbonization Day. And also, it's a pleasure to be here in this important event. So I would like to start with my presentation, talking about what are the key findings of the IPCC for sustainable urban planning, which is relevant for our cities and how we think about decarbonization. So on this presentation, I would like to share with you the key findings for the IPCC on sustainable urban planning for both adapting and mitigating climate change. And once again, it fits very well into the COP27 Decarbonization Day. Yes, thank you. Next slide, please. When we look at where we're heading, as Sweetlana mentioned, our decisions shape our future, and our climate future is in our hands. When we look at the emissions taking place, there's still rising emissions. And even the average of the last 10 years, it was 9.1 gigatons CO2 equivalent more than the previous 10 years. So how do we change this trend all around the world? Decarbonize quickly and in a sustained way. In the next slide, we will also see that how our summary for policymakers emphasized that one of the systemic transitions that we need to see happening around the world takes place in urban areas. The summary for policymakers has statements for urban areas for countries to think about how supporting their cities to decarbonize can also support their reductions in CO2 emissions, and is actually one of the key aspects of realizing the nationally determined contributions. Engaging our cities are needed for countries to realize their mitigation efforts. In the next slide, one of our key findings also emphasizing that urban areas can create opportunities to increase resource efficiency and decarbonization through the systemic transition of infrastructure and urban form towards net zero emissions. And this is a key aspect here at COP27 on Decarbonization Day, how we can engage our cities and urban systems to support us in the green recovery, in the green transition, and decarbonization. Next slide, please. When we look at where we are in terms of urban areas were responsible on a consumption-based aspect, the CO2 and methane considered here, about 29 gigaton of CO2 equivalent in 2020. When we look, if there's going to be moderate action, or if there's going to be low mitigation effort, we can see that this is going to increase and have severe consequences on our global climate. With only moderate mitigation efforts, we see that this will be about 34 gigatons CO2 equivalent, and with low mitigation efforts, even higher. But if there is ambitious and immediate mitigation efforts, including high levels of electrification and energy and material efficiency, global consumption-based emissions can near net zero, both CO2 and methane included, by 2050, and urban areas can come towards this important target. So what do we mean by ambitious and immediate mitigation efforts? In the next slide, we will see 3 areas of strategic efforts that are necessary to transform our urban systems. We see that these 3 strategic areas encompass better urban planning for both reducing energy and material use. Then the next one, electrification in combination with switching to low carbon and renewable energy sources, and enhancing carbon uptake and storage in the urban environment. On the left side, we see how this is going to come towards net zero by 2050 at the latest, with also the mission cities, and we have mission cities in Ukraine right now, all around the world. It's one of the cities that adopted the net zero targets. So we see here in this graph, this target in the context of SSP1, RCP 1.9, and also if there's not mitigation efforts, but this is the one that with the mitigation efforts, we can avoid. So with the ambitious mitigation efforts with these 3 key strategic areas, better urban planning, electrification, and enhancing carbon uptake in the urban environments, we can transform our urban systems. Next slide. What do we mean by this? So when we look at better urban planning, we see that there are ways that cities can be more compact, and when they're more compact, they can provide co-location of jobs and housing. So better services for the people also. By better compact urban form, we can also see that the carbon sinks around our cities, the agricultural areas, the forests, they can also be protected. This is in contrast, so this is compact urban form, but this is in contrast to dispersed and autocentric areas. And this is where there's urban sprawl or growth in urban extent is more than what we mean by compact and walkable. So these are two contrasting urban forms. In the next slide, we also see that more walkable urban form can enable one of the demand side measures. The demand side measure relates to better walkable cities, maybe cycling, active transport, with also co-benefits for health. And we see that even if there's better urban planning, there can be about 20 to 25% reductions in the energy usage. So this is more compact and urban form, has cascading benefits for energy savings and also a healthier lifestyle for people. There's also other details in the IPCC report on demand side measures that's included also in the summary for policymakers that you can be we can take as a reference. And in the next slide, this also shows that there are layers to urban systems. So we have land, the land, how it's managed or how it's laid out, how cities are laid out. They impact transport, the transport options, where buildings are located. If they're located near transit areas, this is transit-oriented development. And for example, when we have more compact urban form for co-locating housing and jobs, this is also impacting some opportunities for transport and buildings. Then this is also connected with energy. So here with the urban systems, we see how these layers are all interacting and connected. Land use, transport, buildings, and energy. On the energy, there can be some lock-in. So for example, the natural gas that we're using in our buildings or the petroleum that we're using in the cars. But electrification, when we electrify these energy, we will use electricity for the energy carrier. This can be unlocked. And when the electricity is connected with low carbon renewable energy sources, we also see that's how this is providing a cascading effect also in the energy system, greener energy systems. Yes, on the next slide, we also see the electrification supports integrating net zero energy sources and urban infrastructure across sectors, especially when there's more flexible energy demand and mobility, heating and cooling to absorb greater share of variable renewable energy. And one of our other findings on the next slide also emphasize that electricity systems are powered predominantly by renewables. They're growing across the world, but supplying entire energy systems with renewables, it can be more challenging. We need more integration, how the electricity is used in the power sector, but not only on the transport, on the buildings, and how these are all integrated. So it's important that there's greater physical, institutional, operational integration for renewable energy systems. And when we look again for cities, integrating systems, coupling sectors, energy storage, smart grids, including thermal grids with district heating and cooling. This is one of the opportunities. Demand side management, flexible demand in urban areas, sustainable biofuels, and hydrogen. And when we look at what it takes to, is it possible for 100% renewable energy systems, we see that these solutions are emerging. On the next slide, we again see our layered urban systems, but also emphasizing that the full potential for reducing consumption-based urban emissions to net zero greenhouse gas can only be possible when emissions outside the urban areas are also addressed. So this can be, for example, the emissions that are taking place in a consumption-based perspective, including the food, the materials that are used in buildings, and what we do with the residual emissions. On the next slide, one more. This is coming to enhancing urban green and blue infrastructure, not only for residual emissions, actually, also for bringing the cities towards net zero. Urban green and blue infrastructure provides many co-benefits, including for energy, including for health. Here we see this figure for different types of urban green and blue infrastructures, also called nature-based solutions. There can be urban forests, green roofs, urban agriculture, but most importantly, street trees, greenways. And these are providing not only mitigation benefits, saving energy, saving emissions, because they are carbon sinks, they absorb the CO2, and the adaptation, so reducing heat stress, mitigating flooding, improving health, improving air quality, and promoting biodiversity. And this is actually coming from Working Group 1 on the technical fact sheet for urban areas, because it's emphasizing there how the existing materials that are used in our cities, they are providing additional, they're contributing to the urban heat island effect. So urban areas, when we look, the total warming is greater in urban areas because global warming adds on to the urban heat island effect. But with the urban green and blue infrastructure, this can also provide some kind of a local cooling effect. For example, the water or the vegetation, depending on the region, about 2 and 3 degrees Celsius can promote it with the local climate, the microclimate. Next one. This is showing the opportunities for the choice of building materials. So again, concrete, steel, these are those materials that support the urban heat island effect. But for example, timber, one of the benefits of timber as compared here is that it can also continue to be a carbon sink. So this is comparing how our choice of building materials also provides one of the opportunities to transform our urban systems. On the next slide, we see that there are different growth typologies. For different cities around the world, this is with the remote sensing data, but with different types of cities around the world, we see how there are different growth typologies in different cities. Some cities are emerging, some are rapidly growing, some are established with different needs, with different opportunities. So when we compare these growth typologies with the mitigation, on the next slide, we will see that there are different opportunities for different types of cities. Whether here on the vertical axis, we see emerging, rapidly growing, established. So it's possible to identify your city in this space. And also, when we talk about urban form, is it more compact? Is it more dispersed? In those cities that correspond to this part that is established and also compact and walkable, again, electrification, but only, for example, public transport or district heating and cooling networks, or electrification in buildings. These are our options that support electrification. There are different options if it's already compact and walkable. If it has some lock-in due to being dispersed and autocentric, again, electrification can support some of that. But urban infill is also an important strategy for these type of cities, and also for both and all of the different typologies, the urban green and blue infrastructure. So again, coming from our IPCC report, these are the different options that are available for urban areas and their integration, how they're integrated in our urban areas can support the decarbonization process and also possibly accelerate. On the next slide, we see that there are different sustainable development objectives that can be coupled. And it's not a clash of sustainable development and mitigation, but how they can be integrated. On the next slide, these are some of the urban mitigation options and how they come across with different sustainable development goals, especially when it's integrating the sector strategies and innovations. There are many synergies that can be obtained. Next slide, please. And going towards the multi-feasibility assessment, we see that we can use this understanding to also look into the different urban mitigation options. And these can provide the tools for us to shift the sustainable development pathways towards sustainable development, unlocking the carbon lock-in and making more services, more well-being for people and the planet. Next slide. This is available from our report once again, so I will not go into details. And coming towards the pathways, it's possible to combine low demand with the renewable energies. And the urban areas also a key aspect in making this possible. So urban cities, urban areas and cities, they contribute to not only the national decarbonization process, but also level. Yes. So our choice is in our hands. Our climate future is in our hands. And what we do in urban areas can also contribute towards decarbonization and accelerating our progress for sustainable development by addressing climate change also. On the next slide. Yes, so starting this session with Svetlana's opening presentation on Working Group 1 and 2, here we come to the findings of Working Group 3 with a particular focus on urban areas. And also our report strongly emphasizes that time for action is now. We need synergetic integrated action now, and the evidence is clear, and the evidence and the need for decarbonization is clear. So I hand it to Svetlana with much appreciation.
Thank you, Shir, so much. It was really very interesting for us to know how it's better to recover our cities based on science from IPCC report. And now we have much more actually here listeners. And I would like actually to give now the floor to Bridge Ukraine, which is a very interesting alliance and promote us to how to better to recover our infrastructure destroyed during this situation with the Russian war on Ukraine. So please, floor is yours. I guess you will explain better about yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Everything is fine. Yeah, you can start,
Yes.
please.
So thank you, Svetlana. Thank you very much for this invitation. Apologies, we could not attend physically this event, but we have received very recently this invitation, so we were not able to join you there. My name is Sotirios, and together with my colleague Sterios Aristotelis Mitoulis, we have initiated Bridge Ukraine just after the invasion of Russia in Ukraine around April this year. And Bridge Ukraine is an alliance committed to facilitate more resilient and more sustainable infrastructure reconstruction. And this is very relevant to our expertise, which is on infrastructure resilience and sustainability. The alliance includes several members from different countries around the world. You can see here a list of names who have joined Bridge Ukraine. This list is expanded, and you can see more information in our website and how you can join this Ukraine if you want to contribute to this alliance. So in this presentation, I will focus to three main points. Firstly, I will give you an overview of Bridge Ukraine and what is the mission of this alliance. Secondly, I will discuss about a resilience framework that we have developed for Ukraine. And this is about how we can inform decision-making based on resilience quantifications for critical infrastructure. And this includes an application for transport infrastructure in Ukraine. And finally, I will present a recent contribution to a report on financing disaster and climate resilient infrastructure toward a net zero transition with application in Ukraine. So we believe, as it was mentioned earlier, that Ukraine can provide a model for post-conflict and post-disaster recovery. These assessments are around this modeling of infrastructure resilience for post-conflict situations. So I will elaborate a bit more on the objectives of Bridge Ukraine Alliance, where we facilitate the reinstatement of critical infrastructure in support of Ukraine's people and economy. And we do that through tracking damage on critical infrastructure. And this includes collection of information and data from satellite images, from social media, but also from available reports that are coming online. So through this data, we try to provide technical evidence on how to optimize the reconstruction of critical infrastructure and inform decision-making for this reconstruction. For that, we have developed and applied our resilience models in order to inform how the allocation of available resources can be more efficient, and also how we can consider sustainable solutions in the reconstruction of critical infrastructure. In other words, how to provide technical evidence from the lenses of resilience and sustainability to facilitate the infrastructure reconstruction. For that, we have built an alliance of engineers, academics, charities, and people of Ukraine who have different expertise. So it's academics, consultants with several years of experience in catastrophe modeling, climate resilience, remote sensing, bridge design, and other infrastructure projects. We deploy our capacities to deliver assessments and designs for faster recovery of Ukraine's infrastructure. And for that, we also aim to include in our ongoing research project and activities, case studies from Ukraine, focusing on bridges, road and railway networks, but also energy infrastructure, hospitals, and other facilities such as schools and ports. What has been delivered so far, here we can see a paper that we have published recently. It's about a conflict resilience framework for critical infrastructure peace building. This is together with experts from different disciplines. Among others, we have with us a top scientist from the US, Igor Linkov, who is working on the US Army Corps of Engineers, and he's helping us with the development of this resilience-based framework for infrastructure reconstruction. So in this framework, we have different levels of knowledge for infrastructure condition and demand. And this includes, for example, data for assets, topology, and connectivity, but also data about infrastructure condition and other social factors which are important for the prioritization of the reconstruction in Ukraine. Other activities include the delivery of workshops to engineers in Ukraine. So you can see here some examples of recent workshops about the design of bridges, on how to employ Eurocodes, for example, and in the design of bridges, and how to employ more resilient designs in the construction of infrastructure. These workshops, these seminars were organized in collaboration with people from Ukraine, from the Ukrainian State Road Research Institute. And also currently we are in discussion for an agreement, a formal agreement with the Ministry of Transportation of Ukraine in order to make this contribution, this support more formal and support with our capacities the needs of the Ministry of Transportation for the reconstruction of infrastructure. Also, something else is that we have already came into agreement with a couple of researchers from Ukraine in order to host them in institutes in the UK. So there are some funding schemes available which support these kind of hosting researchers at risk from Ukraine. So this is something we are also trying to do here with this initiative. And I will continue with the resilience framework and the application in the west part of Kiev as a case study, just to show you what we mean by resilience. So in the left figure here, we can see a graph where in the vertical axis is the performance of the infrastructure, which in normal times it's 100%, but then due to an abrupt event, which can be a natural hazard or another stressor, we have a drop of the functionality. And then after an idle time where we are preparing for the reconstruction, we are gradually apply the restoration in order to achieve the initial level of performance. However, in case of conflicts, like the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, we can have also the time during this conflict in order to collect information, to make assessments, and to provide a resilience by assessment, which is actually all these actions which can contribute in order to reduce idle and recovery times for the reconstruction. So our focus is here in this resilience by assessment, how we can now take some measures, collect data and use this data in order to inform decision-making for the reconstruction. And here is an example, a case study in the west part of Kiev, with the yellow line is the Irpin River, and with the yellow dots is bridges, river crossing bridges that have been damaged. So in this case study, we have explored different reconstruction sequences in order to optimize the connectivity of the communities, of the towns, which we see on the west part of the river with the white dots, and the connectivity of these areas with the capital, Kiev, and critical facilities, which in this case is hospitals in the area of Kiev. So we examined different sequences of reconstruction. For that, we have collected data which is available prior to the hazard or the conflict in this case. So through Google Maps, through other reports and online open source data, we could identify information like the type of the structure, the material, the geometry, and all these were combined with data that is available during the conflict. For example, information from satellite images which show the extent and the level of damage, and also information from social media and other source of news and data in order to characterize the damage and to be able to identify what is the restoration that is needed for the reconstruction. And based on our assessments, we can see here some examples of the output. For example, how different alternative bridge repair sequences can lead to different performances of the network. The performance is evaluated here with the connectivity between the different towns and the critical facilities like hospitals. So different sequence of repair, of restoration can lead to different performance or different level of connectivity. And also this is converted to terms of resilience. Resilience is described by a combined indicator which shows the performance of the network, but also the cost for this reconstruction. So different decisions can lead to different levels of performance and resilience. And this, I think, very important for decision makers and for allocation of resources. And then this is also some assessments that we have performed regarding how to inform financing for disaster and climate resilient infrastructure toward a net zero economic transition in Ukraine. So as it was mentioned before, This is an opportunity for transformation, this conflict, and for that, we have been invited recently to contribute in an opinion paper. It's a global flagship report on disaster and climate resilient infrastructure, which is by the UN CDRI, and this report will be released next year at G20 summit. The title of this report is Financing for Disaster and Climate Resilient Infrastructure for a Net Zero Economic Transition. And the objective is to quantify what is the trade-offs and the synergies between climate resilience and sustainability in the infrastructure development, in particular for adaptation to climate change for low, medium income countries. So as part of this report, we have performed an assessment of how infrastructure adaptation in Ukraine can be facilitated by considering climate projections for highway and railway infrastructure assets. And we have also correlated these assessments with the needs of investments as a function of the GDP of the country. I'm not going into details. This is the steps that we followed in order to complete this assessment. So we have used inventories of data for railway and highway bridges from OpenStreetMaps. So we were able to identify key parameters like the number of assets, the geometry of the material, to produce statistics and analytics for these key parameters, and then combining these with maps that are available for environmental conditions, current conditions, and projections due to climate change, we were able to identify what is the need of restoration resources in order to upgrade, to adapt this infrastructure to future climate conditions. And this includes also the quantification of carbon emissions for this reconstruction. And this was done for considering both conventional and more sustainable strategies for the reconstruction. So here is some information for the data that we have used. With the green, with the yellow dots, you can see the distribution of highway bridges in this example in the country. And then we have classified the bridges in different classes depending on the year of construction. So we can see that most of the bridges is from the 60s and 70s. So it's quite old infrastructure in the country. In total, in this study, we have included about 28,000 road and railway bridges. Then, as I mentioned, we have used available data which show the climatic zones and the projections in the country, different territories of the country. So here is an example of such maps showing the current climatic zones and also projections for different time periods in the future. So based on this information, we were able to perform an assessment of the condition of the bridges, the current condition, but also what is the expected condition, the predicted condition of the bridge stock for different time periods based on these climate projections. And some of the results we can see here in the left graph is the results for adaptation considering conventional strategies, while in the right plot we can see what is the results when we apply more sustainable solutions for the adaptation. So in this graph we see the performance rating of the bridge stock, the railway and the highway bridges, for different scenarios of investment. And this is projected in different periods from now, so from today up to about 80 years later, what is the performance of the bridges when we have different scenarios of investment. For example, we can see that to achieve, let's say, an acceptable level of performance, which is above 5, we need to invest by 2050 about 2.6 million of the country's GDP. So different investments lead to different performances of this infrastructure. Obviously, no investment will lead to a decrease of the infrastructure performance. However, if we are going to apply more sustainable solutions, and this includes, for example, the use of biofuel or the use of green concrete and other sustainable materials in the upgrade, in the reconstruction of bridges, then a further 33% of investment is required, according to our assessments, in order to achieve the same resilience performance, in this case, when we use greener materials. So this is also something that it's very important, is relevant also to what Mikola has described earlier about the need for policies and institutions around the adoption, the development of greener solutions for the reconstruction of infrastructure. But it's also relevant to what Natalia has explained earlier for the application of nature-based solutions, how this can be included in the reconstruction, in the upgrade of infrastructure, in particular for transport infrastructure like railway or highway bridges, in order to achieve a more sustainable performance of this infrastructure. So to conclude this presentation, our plans for future support to Ukraine through this alliance include the delivery of CPD seminars in different areas. So there is a list of areas that the Ministry of Transportation has identified as a priority. And this includes the assessment of damaged bridges, the reconstruction of bridges, but also how we can facilitate asset management. And also future support includes the extent of assessments like the examples that we have seen today for climate resilient infrastructure toward a net zero economic transition. And this will include more accurate data, for example, data for climate projections, like the examples that Svetlana has shown earlier, coming from IPCC models, and this in collaboration with the Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Institute. So these assessments can be extended and be more accurate. And finally, our plan is to secure some funding for research projects in order to further support these assessments, these research. And last but not least, to host researchers at risk from Ukraine, and to extend our collaborations with colleagues from Ukraine. So if you want to see more information about this initiative, and if you would like to join this initiative, you can visit our website and you can find more information. I will stop here and thank you again for the invitation, and we are available for any questions and discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Sotirios, and actually thank you to present this very interesting and needed actually initiative for Ukraine to recover not only bridges but other infrastructure, I'm pretty sure. And it's not only for Ukraine crucial, but for other countries as well, especially for those who are after this natural disaster destruction as well. So they will need this recover, and it will be better and actually it's not better, it's actually now demand of the time to make this reconstruction in a climate resilient way. And actually, I would like actually now to invite Vidvus Beldavs, who is from Latvia, to conclude with our speakers. And Vidus, are you here? I just cannot see.
I'm here.
Oh, great. So, great. So can you?
Okay,
you have
here am I.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Uh,
No,
have your presentation?
yeah, I have a presentation,
Okay.
and I think this is it. Share. All right. Mine is quite general. Let's see, I have to get rid of this.
Presenting
It's
mode.
underneath this thing. Let's see. I think I'll have to stop share and then go back and start the presentation unless I can find how to move this bar here.
Oh, I
Okay.
cannot read in your.
Yeah. Let me do this. I'll stop share, then I'll go to. I'll start my presentation on show presentation, and then I'll go back to screen share. Okay. From the beginning.
Let's try.
Okay, now what I need to do is go to Zoom meeting, and now I need to screen share. We'll be fine. We'll go here. Okay. Mine is somewhat more general. I have not been working on recovery of any country, although I have read on the issue. I'm going to be looking at a little bit general view. It's war and climate disasters, and certainly the impressive work being done relating to Ukraine, no doubt will help with the disasters to come. And I hope that is also integrated with UN SPIDER. And also there's an effort under the International Science Council that deals with disasters, disaster relief, and so forth. Now, so what I see here is we got three levels we're dealing with of this crisis. There's the global, the Ukraine level, and also Russia, because Russia also will need to recover or it will become an extreme, unstable actor that will need to be addressed. So, as folks have mentioned, this war affects all social, economic indicators globally and locally. The risk of famine, risk of nuclear accidents, and war, escalating costs of energy, food, transportation, other items, 250,000 people dead or disabled, Ukraine and Russia. And there's also the destruction of science and education capacity in Ukraine, with several universities totally destroyed, laboratories ransacked, and equipment stolen. But the impact is also on Russia. It's isolated. Scientists no longer working at CERN or with ESA, and their careers essentially ruined by this war. But there's also the diminished capacity to address all other threats, and whether it's climate change or it's pandemics, or there are multiple other threats that are on the horizon that need to be responded to, that need global cooperation. And without global cooperation, the solution will not be possible. So this war must stop. There is a doctrine developed in 2005, approved by the UN, and this is the responsibility to protect. It has generally been looked at as protection from genocide within a country, war crimes, and so forth. I think what needs to be understood is that Russia's war is in effect a war against all of us, the whole planet. And if it's perceived that way, I think it might be possible to stop it. I would say this, stopping the war is the most important single measure to combat climate change. And aliens have no obligation to save us. We must take action to stop the war. Now, Ukraine and Russia have some presence in Africa. Russia has far greater presence. I have dealt in the last year or more significantly with Africa, and there's quite a bit of not popularity, but favoring Russia in many African countries. I think it's very, very important that this message get out that in effect, the war is a war against all of us. It's not just a war against Ukraine. So if Russia stops the war, recovery becomes possible globally in Ukraine and in Russia. And the adverse impacts on climate change, and they're considerable, as brought out in today's session and elsewhere. The war itself is having adverse effects on climate change. But as long as the war goes on, measures to really do something about it will not be particularly effective. So the first item has to be addressed is stop the war. And then major resources will be freed. Now, the war impacts the total environment. Ukraine's challenge is complicated because of the legacy of the Soviet times, and that is centralized systems. And my last visits to Ukraine have not been recent, but 2014, we still had Lenin statues in many places. And in last week, the Russian authorities restored a Lenin statue in Melitopol. And that's part of the recovery problem that is facing us in Ukraine, is that mentality still exists. And it's not only in the Soviet occupied regions. Resources limitations favor continuity of existing systems rather than transformational change. And what's needed is transformational change, so those statues disappear forever. And this slide points to, and I'm not going to get into this, it's the total effect, and other speakers have addressed this. It's every aspect. It's the total environment being damaged by the war. It's air quality, greenhouse gases, biodiversity, soil, water, and that's available. There's a link. The energy systems are key to green recovery. There are large-scale system vulnerabilities in war and natural disasters. The current Russian attacks on energy infrastructure show that the Ukraine infrastructure, as it is, built on a Soviet centralized model, has vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities would emerge with climate disasters, nuclear disasters, and so forth. They are there and they need to be addressed. And then there are the urban-rural differences. Small scale, mini grid, resilient, linkable with smart grid technologies over large areas offer a possible solution that's resilient against all kinds of shocks. And whether it's climate or war, the system would be resilient. And I think that's something that needs to be reviewed. One UN program that I'd like to point to, where I don't see Ukraine's name, but I think it would be good to have Ukraine's name there, that Ukraine is among the people addressing the long-range problems, and the environment invaders are not, which is important to get the world behind even more behind Ukraine than it is. The energy compacts were created by the UN and brought into active use in 2021. And this is Sustainable Development Goal 7. Ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy for all. And the challenge is most urgent in Africa. There are 600 million people who have no access to electricity. And what's most troubling is that the IEA forecasts still show 600 million people without access based on current trends. So the UN compacts have been created to drive down commitment at the level of companies, organizations, areas in the country and countries where they make specific commitments to renewable energy, climate change, and the commitment is made and documented with the UN. And the hope is that this will work and that the 600 million people without access to electricity in Africa will have access by 2030, and investment will pour in and we'll make some transitions. And there are some energy compacts that might be useful for Ukraine to consider. Let's go into the model here to Germany. I think we're supposed to go to Germany. And let me hit on Germany here again, maybe.
But I guess
Anyway.
it will in the mode when it will not go there, so it's other.
Yeah. Anyway, but the countries that have energy compacts that are important, that might be some models for, oh, here's Netherlands. That's one that can be looked at. They're quite simple. So they're going to bring together their parties. But if you download the energy compact, it gets into details of how specific and milestones by year on actions that will be taken by the Netherlands or other countries. I think it would be very useful to get Ukraine's name in this list, and that can be done. I put together an energy compact for an energy. Oh, here's the United States. Okay, this is probably useful to look at. 80% electricity from clean energy sources by 2030. Support emerging economies in achieving ambitious climate goals. This basically says the US is ready, prepared, and will committed to helping, whether it's India, it's Africa, and other countries, to achieve sustainable development goals and climate neutrality and these goals. And then specifically sub-Saharan Africa. Those commitments are there. If Ukraine had an energy compact and the energy compact referenced similar things, let's say that there is a commitment that includes Ukraine's outreach to also help address the 600 million people without electricity access in Africa. And I believe that can be done in this year, February 4th. I was a co-organizer of a conference dealing with African energy, and we sponsored 2 speakers from Ukraine that are developing low-cost solar cells that can be built from widely available materials. That was very well received, and Ukraine is very welcome to participate. I believe that Ukraine, with its 79,000 scientists, has capacity that can be paid for, and to build research capacity in Ukraine while helping to build research capacity in Africa and to address their problems as well. I think those goals are possible. It builds friends in Africa that would vote for Ukraine and not the invader. And I think that can be done. So I'm, let's see, how do I go back to the other screen? Now I have to go to the actual presentation again. Let me see. Okay, here we go. This is this screen. So, and yeah, the World Meteorological Organization also has a energy compact. ANSOL is the one that I worked on. ANSOL is a Pan-African organization, and our energy compact is aimed at building research and education capacity in Africa to drive energy, renewable energy, and meet climate goals. So, and ANSOL would welcome partnerships with Ukraine. So here, so my suggestion would be develop a country national energy compact, and then show the commitment to a roadmap to achieve green energy goals that are linked to climate goals, which is basically much of that's been done. I heard that today. And then also show the concern for developing countries. In the United States, there are several cities that have energy compacts. There are also other NGOs that have energy compacts. I think this mechanism could link commitment at, including universities, commitment at levels that finally can be measured. How are we progressing in achieving green energy? Okay, and I think so. I guess that would be right now my pitch. It's relatively limited, but the major drive has to be to address climate change. The war must stop, and everything possible must be done to stop the war. And I believe China would come on board if they have a perception that what Russia is doing is threatening all of us, which it is, and meaning the whole planet. And it's the greatest impediment to achieving climate change goals globally right now. So I guess that is my message, and I have no more to say today. Thank you very much, Svetlana.
Thank you, Vid, actually for your good suggestion. I really know that we will follow this way. I mean, we need this green transition. We will follow other actually suggestions from our speakers. And I want to conclude this event just to say that definitely we don't have any other choice that decarbonize our economy and go green and go to recover our country in this climate resilient way. We know that we can do it in Ukraine, and we want to show this example and be a role model, not only in Europe, but for other countries. And when we speak about natural disaster, we need to understand this natural disaster actually accelerated due to our human impact. And we need to understand that we are part of nature. So with this, actually, we need to behave. So we need to, again, to adjust our behavior on this planet accordingly. So there are many, we actually touched many aspects during this session. I really very thankful to all speakers. We were speaking about this nature-based solution. We were speaking about urban planning, where we will be living most of population. In Ukraine already we have 70% of population living in cities, and we are going to this. And we were speaking about actually energy sector and about company in Ukraine, real company which wants to be greener, and about science, about this data. We were speaking about this initiative, Bridge Ukraine, which is, I hope, will help us to reconstruct so many destroyed things. And I hope that no more countries will have such destruction anymore, and Ukraine will be the last on the planet destroyed by missiles. So thank you so much. And I hope we made our best. And yeah, just let's do it together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you for organizing.
Thank you very much, Svetlana.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you.